Hello, Jim. Hi, man. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I am good. Happy to see you, obviously.
Um, with the title The Ultimate Wisdom Library, I couldn't resist.
That title is one day old, and I
I
know
noticed that.
it's going to divide our community. I think this kind of hyperbole, I think, is important, but not everybody agrees, and that's what it's for. Discussions, right?
Are you expecting a few or a lot?
Oh, I'm just expecting the usual crowd. I haven't
Okay.
really gone out and told people. I've been experimenting with some AI music. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give you a link because you may be slightly less judgmental than others. One second. Going to put it in the chat here because some people absolutely, to them, it's rage bait saying that something is done with AI. But yeah, I saw this video with my son Edgar the other day, and it was AI content, and it was nice, cute animations and stuff. But then it was really nice music, and it turned out the music was AI, which I found shocking. Real, proper human voices. So I've been experimenting, and actually, Rob, I'm going to give you that link too. It's a link to some experiments I'm doing orchestrating music using AI tools. And phew, I managed to get it out to you guys before Fabienne entered, or Mark. Good timing, so the
Okay,
links are there.
I'm having camera problem as usual.
That's okay. We can just imagine you vividly. Well, let me just change my view here. I'm sorry. So, hi
Okay.
guys.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Fabienne, you need at least a picture, for your profile. A very
Mm.
stern Helvetica Fabienne there. It is Helvetica, yes, it is.
I do have a stern face actually, but
Yeah.
I'll try to look for a stern face photo.
Okay, just make one from AI, that's the world today. Hello, Ken.
I have connection problems.
I like his choice of font. I think it's appropriate.
I'm not sure if we have a choice, but yes, it is. It's
He is
not the
he is a
worst.
man he is a man without serifs.
Or there's a new serif in town.
Ooh. You are a
Okay.
font of wit.
That actually took me a few half seconds longer than it should have. So Dini will be here. I just had a meeting with her ahead of this. So yeah, no, I threw up a topic today, a theme of something that's probably provoking positively and negatively in all directions. So we'll discuss that. But if you don't mind, actually, Fabian, first of all, is because today isn't like a hardcore thing. Is there anything you would like to show with a proper time allocation? Because we don't have a strong specific theme.
I'm always happy to show things. I have something to share, but not to show. And it takes between 1 minute and infinity, so whenever there is time.
That is a very you statement. Okay, well, let's start with that. And let's keep it within 1 to infinity, shall we? No
Works.
more.
And no less. No, I spent basically an extended weekend at the Imaginary Institute here in Brussels. It's linked to the VUB, the Free University of Brussels, and it was a long weekend. It started Saturday morning and it ended. Actually, it's still on now, but I said I had to go. And the theme was the future, so I was able to politely mention that I had to go to the present future of text, which is here and now. And I think, first of all, it's a cool institute. It's very boundless institute. So I'll put the chat. The link in the chat. There it is. And basically the purpose of the institute is to share worldviews, so perspective on how different people see their world or our world differently. And why I think it's very relevant to us is because it's done through different ways and mostly protocols, namely that we as a group go through steps, kind of like workshops, basically. But again, the goal of the Institute is to develop the imagination. And I think imagination for the future, or developing imagination to imagine different futures, it is quite relevant. The problem with this is it's quite challenging, to be honest, because you meet different people with different viewpoints, so you don't understand them. You don't get it, the whole colliding of worldviews. So I had that was quite intense, to be honest, and it was all the way to dancing, to feeling gravitational wave through the body by enacting such protocols. So I think it is also quite on point for us when it's relating to XR, because it's about embodiment. They have a catalog of protocols that we can try to enact, and they would not approve of me saying this, but it is a bit like the Bono method, or changing like thinking hats. But they ask for people who participate to do the thing, to go through the motion, and it can be literal motion. So I think it is quite provoking, quite interesting, and I would suggest that that at some point, whenever we feel like, or if we believe as a group it's relevant to the process, we enact such protocols, or we define our own protocols, and it is not. It can be a discussion as we're doing now, but it can be, I don't want to say more, but different. And the difference is the provocation, so that we basically literally step out of our comfort zone. So again, it is hard, and I felt quite awkward in a lot of moments. I think most people did at some point, but I think again, as a kind of kick in the butt to not get stuck in our ways, it is productive, creative provocations. So I would suggest that at some point, either we invite somebody from the Institute to come and force us to change our ways just for a short moment, and you sense space. We don't have to feel too threatened or challenged or whatnot. But I really had a lovely weekend, and I think I have let's say new creative juice flowing thanks to those sessions.
Just going to copy this over for Jimmy. Okay, I copied it and repasted it since he came in after you started talking. No, that's really cool. And funnily enough, I would say that is completely on point for the notion of the little topic that I posted for today. But yeah, can you give us some more, maybe some specific examples of how they do that?
Sure, I can. The point though, the bigger picture and why it's kind of resisting definition is those are literally just examples. That means they are there to be also challenged and modified every step of the way. I mean, some of those, I mean, you're probably familiar with, like just taking post-it notes of the different concepts or challenges we have in a field or a problem, and then mapping them on a, let's say, large wall, kind of whiteboard, and then arranging them spatially. So putting the close one together, then drawing links, lines, arrows, and then putting a name on a group, like clustering, basically. And then finding gaps where those links don't should exist and yet don't. So that was one session, for example, which lasted, I think, about an hour or two. Another session was about finding paradoxes. What are the paradoxes in the problem space we're in? Because those paradoxes don't necessarily have to be solved or resolved, but might lead to interesting, like why do they exist in that space, and potentially even how to not necessarily again resolve, but find how they can be generative. Typically, that was like a recurring keyword. How do we keep the interactions between people and the problem space to be generative, how we can keep on proposing more. So that's why I think the safe space was a very important topic. So that it doesn't mean there are no silly ideas, that we have to be mindful of how we share them with each other, express each other in a way that others understand this kind of things. And that means, yeah, those protocols are as explicit as possible, a bit like if you were like doing the steps of an algorithm or process explicited. And yet, because it's with humans in a room, we are able to like clarify. And of course, as we all know, with this kind of live sessions, the biggest challenge being the time. If it's productive, generative, we have a good idea how we keep it time boxed so that we can try the next protocol, the next provocation to keep on generating differently. Is it a bit clearer or more explicit?
It is clear, and with that, if you don't mind, I will go into the library thing, because I think it's almost the same thing, believe it or not. Oh, hang on, all kinds of Zoom things are here in the way. I want to see you guys, not the whole background. You can see, of course, right? So hang on, I want to see more than just that. Okay, so this is not intended for you to read, okay? It is kind of literally a background. So I make the assertion that we are really close to building an ultimate wisdom library, because we have information networks, we have lots of data storage. What we really are missing, and this bit I don't think is controversial at all, is the interface. You know, we can get things in dribs and drabs on little screens, or AI speaking things to us which may or may not be true. So of course this is hyperbole, no question about that. But if we think back, not that long ago, the thinking of what the internet or cyberspace could be was also quite grandiose. So now I feel to make such a library, we need to focus on not how things are transmitted, but how these packets can be transparent and open. I'm purposely leaving this small so it's harder to read, so you don't get too into it. So something I also think is not controversial in this group is the notion that information in academic things like PDFs and so on is pretty frozen. They don't communicate what they are to the environment. And I believe very strongly that if we look at the question of what wisdom is, I'm not wise enough to define wisdom, of course not. But I do know a little bit about what wisdom is not. And I think that's what was being typed earlier. Wisdom is not rigidity. It is change. It is trying to understand connections. And that's why I use this grand word, because the notion of what we might do if we have our knowledge containers in forms that communicate to the ecosystem is to make a very, very changeable environment. So as our wisdom grows, our understanding and interaction with our knowledge can grow. So if we are ever going to get close to something like this, of course it can never happen fully, we need to have our information in conducive ways. And we can also look at what it means then to spatialize knowledge much better, because Peter talks about libraries and changeability there. There's also talk about sculptures. There's talk about all these shapes.
Hey,
Hello. Sorry, that was a weird sound. Anyway, so the notion here really is, if you want to sit in an old-fashioned library or a cyberspace library, you should be able to do that. If you want to be in an abstract space, you should be able to do that. It's the changeability that's important, and that can only come if the knowledge can say what it is, right? So very, very importantly, this is not a call to make new, formats. We have them already. It's just a matter of how they can be accessed. Most of this stuff, like an academic document, is in LaTeX and so on. Just don't hide it, as we talked about many times. So the analogy here, I've only got a few more slides, is between a bus and a bike. A bus doesn't take any skill, and it'll take you pretty close to your destination. A bike requires skill and take you exactly to your destination. So what I think is a useful way for us to look at is when we build these information spaces, allow people to take the bus route and get kind of what they need, but also to build up the skill to be able to really manipulate their information. There needs to be a way to do that and not just have it in one default way. So the two final points are this should not be done by engineers or politicians or educators or any other group. This has to be done as a wider community, what I think we're doing. And then as action items, and this is what I think might be interesting for us to discuss. The first thing is we've had many discussions of what we should consider knowledge objects inside a document. Is it a heading? Is it a paragraph? Is it a citation? We can take guidance, and I only thought of this yesterday, from traditional maps of the world. Maps of the world don't show everything. They only show things that the map makers believe are pertinent. As Mark and I discussed the other day, an academic document has certain things that the author has pointed out to be pertinent, like a figure, a table, bolding, heading, and so on. So that's the beginning of the kind of knowledge that the system should have of the information. And we should really not assume we can build this as one thing. We should definitely do the prototype thing that Fabienne is so great at. And then assume we can, over time, as a direction, make it better. So we use the information we have, and then we make the experiences for it, and then we keep reverting. In closing, I think we should make the assumption that at least it's theoretically possible to build authoring environments where basically all the information is made available on publication so that people who access the information will have that information. And we don't know yet what that is, but hopefully over time we can learn more. And that was it. That was my provocation for discussion today. Wisdom is definitely different than knowledge. Absolutely, Dini. And the reason I chose to use the term is a little bit provocative, but it's also that wisdom is an action. Oh, has Dini had to leave already? I can't see her. Okay, anyway, still replying to Dini. Right, okay. But instead of writing, I will try to shush. Mark, you were first with your comment. No, you weren't. Rob was. Rob, please go ahead.
When I was at the Institute, I remember making a little graphic of a kind of egg with past, which is data, present, which is not information, and the future, which is knowledge, which is what you apply information to. And the surrounding of the egg was we called wisdom.
I think that syncs with this completely, Rob, because I'm not saying that the wisdom is in the library. I'm saying that the way we interact with our knowledge and information allows us to grow our wisdom. So yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And Mark, you were talking about naval charts.
Oh, sorry, I was just making a light-hearted comment that it turns out that often there's something on the chart because somebody ran into something they didn't think was there. But there's also, in a sense, a wider point to draw from it. The maps show what we know, and you gave a link to something, a Guardian article about sort of maps, and it was having a complaint about there being blank bits. Well, the blank bits are the bits you don't know. And there will generally be blank bits towards the edge. And I mean, it's like even your bicycle and bus, the bicycle's going to struggle once it goes off road. And that is where the edge of knowledge is.
100%. And that's really, really important. And that gets us into the question of what annotations is. Because I could imagine the first time you hit something in the ocean that you didn't know was there, you do a big red cross on a map. And that would be an annotation in that it wasn't done by the creators. But at a certain point, that should definitely go in the real map. So I think there's a lot of analogies to be drawn there, Mark. Jim?
It seems to me that you can't really talk about knowledge or wisdom without talking about what. It seems to me that structure is a key question and topics are a key question. I'm very concerned about identifying societal problems, for example, in the United States, and there are many. But rather than talking about problems, it seems to me you need to start with a specific problem and a specific topic. And even wisdom, it seems to me, is around a general topic. So when we talk about old-fashioned libraries, I think we should also start talking about, and we have been, new-fashioned libraries. How are they organized? What's their structure? And how do they then incorporate the digital domain? But it seems to me you have to start with structure along the lines of what Bob Horn would probably suggest. End of thought.
This is where this comes from, absolutely, because we've talked a lot about knowledge sculptures, but what really matters are knowledge connections, which should be able to be sculpted in many ways. So that's where the structure would come from. But of course, you need to keep being able to change that as you update your position. And when you have disagreements, that needs to be updated too. Any of you watching the Apple TV series Pluribus?
No.
I'll give you the basic premise
Yes.
without ruining at all the plot, because it's extremely relevant to right now. And Peter, just 1 second. Oh, is that what pluribus means, Fabian? Oh, interesting. So the notion is that the planet Earth has been taken over by aliens who, through whatever means, are in every single person's brain except for 12 people or something like that. So these 12 people are wondering what's going on. And there was somebody who was injured and they needed a doctor. And this hive mind, or every human being connected to every other human, they said, we have the best doctors in the world. We can fix this. Took me a while to realize that if you go to any top hospital, they are not going to agree who the top surgeon is. Right? So at the top of any field, there will be disagreements. So the notion of a hive mind actually agreeing on what is best is a huge fiction, which is very, very relevant to that. Peter, welcome from brunch.
Okay, when I'm thinking about libraries, I also like to think about the collection itself as something that could be visualized. I want to be able to see a dendrogram representing how the collection has evolved over time, and then maybe like take a first order derivative on the collection, see which areas are expanding, which areas are contracting, and not just the books, but also usage of the collection. And I want to be able to slice that across different demographics. So what are professors in the linguistics program reading as opposed to what are people in the CS program reading? Where are those books overlapping? I want to have the system be able to give me a visualization when I'm in my headset, showing me those little glowing constellations so that I can use that to help guide what I'm going to be researching. And I want to be able to embed little notes in that visualization so that someone else who sees that will say, oh, somebody left an annotation here. There's a possible connection. Maybe we should have a symposium on this overlap topic.
It's so important what you're saying there, Peter, because some of these things should be doable. Some of them maybe not so much. Like when you're saying what other certain professors are reading, the question is how that data would be made available.
Right. Basically, the way I imagine, I think the default position, at least as far as my own research goes, I'd be perfectly happy to have the entire world know about everything. If there are a couple little areas that aren't related to what I want to be sharing academically, I'd cordon that off on a proactive basis. So I'd go for a default public, show my browsing activity, share it with the world for the greater good in the hopes that other people will do likewise. Other people might have more of a privacy-minded orientation. Maybe they're researching some political science topics that might be a little bit hot, or looking at something that might get them into hot water with their department chair. So they might want that little subsection of research to be cordoned off by a nice strong firewall. And you maybe have an interactive dialogue with the system where it would actually ask you questions to help tease out where those lines should be drawn. So I can see like an expert system interacting with the user to help the user establish where they want the boundaries to be rather than just a straight up all or nothing.
Yep. I'm going to give the mic to Fabienne on this. I just wanted to add, we kind of already have this in the sense of Dave Miller, Mark and my colleague, professor. He tends to use his own old papers for references because he clearly is interested in what he's written before. So if we manage to make public the references in a document in a way that can be read, not just frozen in a PDF, then very easily we should be able to institute things where you choose to publish a paper that is basically just references, and you don't have to go through a journal. That could be a private thing. So we have the mechanisms. I'm very glad you brought that up, Peter. And that goes exactly into what I'm guessing Fabienne's going to talk about.
Pretty much that indeed, and I was putting it a bit playfully, I hope, in the chat, that is kind of the give me the files scenario that, of course, it's we conceptualize it easily. I think there is a true need for it. Once we do have the data, so the files, the actual files or API, whatever, same, then I think it's just quote unquote a UX question, which doesn't mean it's easy, but I think we can imagine paths for it. And I put an example in the chat. So with Zotero, I don't necessarily recommend Zotero, but it is open source, so it means it's easy, relatively easier than anything else to extend, and it's about academic documents, and they have like Zotero Cloud and groups and permissions, so that if you do want to make it public or limited to your own group of collaborators, you can do that. So I think it is very basic. Let's say it's not necessarily XR related, but let's say again, once we do have the data, then bring it to XR, and we do have the CSL JSON, which is the export format they use for references, as a filter. So we can imagine like pulling data from Zotero Cloud instance that is shared by whomever wants to collaborate on that academic topic, and then manipulate it. I think you're muted, Ford. At least I don't hear you.
Thank you. I'm surprised you want to hear me. I'm just kidding. Yes, I was muted. That goes very much to what you have built in terms of filters and imports, and that was one of my slides that I quickly ran through. We shouldn't have to invent new stuff, but if it's clear, we can import it, whether it's a Zotero thing or a BibTeX section from a LaTeX or whatever, that's fine. The only thing that I think I'm really screaming about is don't throw it away when you publish. Make it accessible through whatever means. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is actually at a slightly lower level in that we don't even have a way of reliably and agreeably recording this information that we want. It's like, it's been very interesting. I'm working with some people who work with Zotero because they asked me to, but the complaint comes back is, yes, it's open source, but you can't fix it because no one will build the stuff I want because the people who need stuff aren't programmers. And it's like, there's a wonderful system underneath it. There's a thing called CSL where you can effectively describe how you want something laid out. The problem is it's all in XML and the documentation is written for XML programmers who probably aren't the people who care about referencing at all. So it's another of these disconnects. And it's really sad that, people are probably leaving their comp sci course and, want to go and build AI stuff. It'd be much nicer if maybe a few of them, built an human understandable citation mapping system, because part of the point of CSL is you take a known set of fields and you basically say how they're going to appear in whatever you've been asked them to appear as. But that is the underlying issue is, yes, we can translate all this stuff if actually we have some sense of agreement as to what it is. And I think over the centuries, it turns out that humans are actually really bad at that. I wish we were better, but I wonder if it's going to get any better. And certainly there needs to be a replacement or an updated sort of standardized sort of like ISO type supported replacement for BibTeX, which was designed before the web.
I would contend, Mark, that some of it is relatively strong, as in clear. A lot of it isn't, from what you have taught me. But also, I really want to make the point that we can do that as a community. If you, Mark, since you really know what you're talking about, if you even, let's say, write a guide, put it on our site saying, when you are doing BibTeX, first name, last name, or whatever it might be, these issues, because there is no organization of the world to fix this, right? I'm not being arrogant on our behalf, but if someone else suddenly Big does it, fine, we just stop what we're doing and copy them. But we can. I mean, the internet was graduate students, for crying out loud, right? So I really feel that, can information be solidly written down unambiguously? No, it cannot. But we have to make an effort so that we can have the fluidity of what we need for the library at the end of it. So I think we're on the same page there, maybe a slightly different emphasis. Peter.
Yeah, I think we need to pay a little attention to the notion of authority control, and I really see that as being non-monotonic. I might think that two people are the same person or two people are different people because the recorded form that a document was signed with is identical in both cases, but then some subsequent development might bring in new information to me showing that in fact they're different people. One of the biggest shocks and surprises back when I was an undergrad was realizing that the Noam Chomsky who was writing about political topics was actually the same Noam Chomsky as the famous linguist. And it took a while. My default assumption was that these are completely different areas of literature, so it's just a coincidence that Noam Chomsky is the name in both cases. And then I found a document at some point showing that, in fact, it's actually the same Noam Chomsky. I was relatively naive back in the undergraduate days, so I didn't think to go looking for authority control records in the library catalog where I would have found them had I thought to look. But just as a naive user of the library, you find some books with the name and you assume that because it's a different area and subset of literature that they're different people when really they're the same person. So discovering some bit of information, it could go the other way. I might think it's the same person and discover that maybe there were two different Ken Thompsons who both happen to be programmers, and I wasn't aware of that until I discovered this new document that showed that they were at completely different places at the same time. So, couldn't possibly be the same one. They're really two different people. Or maybe finding some reference to them both being on a panel at the same time. So we have to build that flexibility for the idea that you're not getting ground truth necessarily, but you're getting all the pieces that you need over time to modify your view. So everything would be more of a probabilistic mapping of true world identities to document associations. In some areas, it might be extremely strong with an exceedingly unlikely possibility of your being wrong, but you always have to be open to the possibility that you could discover something that could flip the script.
Yeah, that's really important, Peter. And that's the reason I call this thing wisdom, because it alludes to exactly that. That if you have a rigid, we think we know everything library, it ain't that. So I do have a question then as a follow-up to everyone. Let's assume that we managed to get really, really good data, metadata clarity. Let's assume that it is technically solved, not necessarily fully informationally solved. Let's accept all the issues. What would we want to do with it? You put on, let's talk from XR. You have this, you put on your headset and all the information within your field, every single piece of knowledge, paper, whatever it is, can tell you when it was published, who the author was, what it cited, what cited it, what the topics inside are, what images, what data is there. Anything that you would want is available. What kind of things would you want to do and see?
I think I'd like to be able to watch someone else working with the collection. One really neat phenomenon that's developed in YouTube over the last couple of years is people who live code and they'll stream what they're doing. So you actually get them doing their own little self-dialogue, only verbalizing instead of it happening inside your head. So it's like, now I'm trying this as a AA linked list. Maybe that's not the best data structure to use here. Instead, we could use this. And you actually see them live coding and see them when they go down a rabbit hole that turns out to be a dead end, back up and try something different. And it'd be really neat if we could capture that instead of only having the final artifact that, we reconstruct our approach to how we arrive there for the paper. So the paper looks like there's this beautiful, crystal clear linear path from a couple starting premises to the end result, backing up everything along the way. Whereas the actual way we got to that paper was a really tangly, circuitous route. And then we go back and we sort of retroactively establish a new continuity of how I went straight from point A to point B in a linear fashion for the final finished paper. So for students who are coming up behind us, if they could watch the processes of how you write a Chi paper or how you develop a new utility to solve some simple little BibTeX reformatting problem, it could be extremely useful. So it's not just the final, okay, here's how we want posterity to think we arrived at our conclusion. Here's how we really got there.
That's definitely an interesting notion in specific fields. I also can imagine that a lot of people would be uncomfortable with letting other people see, well, with me, it would be how stupid I can be. But of course, as an ideal, I understand that. But let's say we have this. Okay, so Peter sometimes has a library behind him as a when he's on Zoom here. I'm sure you can all remember it. Oh, I will get back to that. Ken, please go ahead. It's even better if you do it unmuted, Ken.
Sorry, making the assumption that the process data is anonymized, just as a premise so that we don't get into weird issues. I think my response to that is that this seems like a really great use for aggregating that kind of process and then using it to train an AI. It seems like something AI would be very good for. Like you're looking at some final artifact and you say, what were the steps that people generally have gone through to get from A to B, which is not a straight line from A to B. So combining that metadata with an AI model seems like a very productive thing to me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Maybe we should try to reach out to XAI. I've been having some really good interactions with Grok recently, and it seems like it has a better alignment, at least with my kind of an academic mindset, than the other AI systems have had. So that could be a possible avenue. I know they have an API. Maybe we should look at trying to bring Grok into XR. And maybe, who knows, maybe Elon's people might be able to provide us with a little bit of funding to help make that happen.
I don't think that's really aligned with our values, unfortunately. There are issues there. So no, I mean, I do have a Tesla, but pre-madness. But okay, but looking at you still, Peter, as I think you've all seen, Peter sometimes in the background has this beautiful old-fashioned library. Okay, so let's imagine we're virtually in such a thing, and it's the most physical-looking thing in the world. And we feel that all of the volumes are presented as books, have all their information accessible to us, to interactions, even to AI, whatever. And I'm giving you the most boring possible, I mean, beautiful, but boring possible start. What could you imagine doing? What would you first like to just do? Come on, dudes. And you're all dudes. That's a problem. We need to fix that. Anyway, yes, Rob.
I still want to be able to see my entire library, which is in my house, and be able to click on any book in the library and have it available to look at or read.
Absolutely. That is a core initial thing you should be able to do. Now, if I may, what's the IP problem? Oh, intellectual property. Yeah, no, absolutely. But if we, yeah, Mark.
Well, I was just thinking, and in terms of Rod's point, and I was drawing the connection. You were saying, and here's this wonderful old-fashioned library. I'm thinking, so we're talking about the future, and what we're looking at is a picture of how we used to bind books, 400 years ago.
Yeah.
That was certain irony. One of the interesting things that people tend to enthuse about libraries is the serendipity of the stacks. I was looking for book X, and I actually found book Y. Which actually you now don't get in a sort of Google search, because after you've taken the spam off the top, you basically are going to a small target. So you lose that. So that's another angle in a sense to what Rob's saying is, yes, it'd be lovely if I could see my sort of library when I need it, but also if my library could sort of gently intertwingle it so as to give me not quite show me a random assortment, but sort of give me a different arrangement of the book. There is that thing every so often I end up reshelving things here. And it throws up the odd association I hadn't thought about. So that's another way, even with working just with proxy objects for even if we never have the physical version. That's a bit interesting. It's a bit like I think about I don't use online music. All my music is stuff but basically I keep locally in play. And I'm very aware that my memory of it is actually visual in terms of, as it were, what you might think of as the record or CD cover. Of course, if you can't get the cover and find an image of it, it plays merry hell with your actual recollection of where things are. So there's another aspect here about the recall of the books. I'm very conscious that when I think of a book, I tend to in here its spine or its cover or even just its predominant color springs to mind. I just think there's again something interesting in that. It doesn't make me want to put all the yellow things on one shelf and red things on another. I know some people do that. That's probably more of an interior design thing. But anyway, if you have all the book objects, the knowledge objects, essentially in a malleable form, then yes, you ought to be able to use them in any way you like. Thanks.
So to take Rob's idea seriously and not to also sound dismissive with the IP or intellectual property problem. So first of all, it is feasible, and again, to kind of briefly go back on the Imaginary Institute that I visited this long weekend. One of the beauty, of course, were the people, and that was quite special. Including living, unfortunately, but it was also the bookshelf. The whole institute is covered with bookshelves, and on the bookshelves, the books themselves, which I stole quite a few, to be honest. And of course, that was also my kind of reaction that I want this bookshelf. I want the actual bookshelf with all the books on it. I want to bring it home. I don't have time to skim through it. I briefly tried, but it's hard, and it is literally the bookshelf because of its serendipity, the curation that the people took time to put those books together. So it is in itself, it is a very precious artifact. And my way then to try to cope. Sorry, Peter, I'll put a link in the chat. Imaginary Institute. And I did not take the photo, but my idea was like, if I did have a proper camera, I would take a high resolution photo of the bookshelf. Then I would do OCR on all the covers. I would keep the relative position because indeed there is the serendipitous aspect. Through the name, I get ISBN, for example, and through a magical process, I won't put on the record, but I can get the content of the book themselves, or not everything, but most of it. And then, so it is to have that like virtual copy of the bookshelf, including the relative position of all, is feasible. The books, at least the one that exists digitally, to get them themselves is also feasible. And then it still begs the question that then what? Then do you read an individual book? Do you start to annotate an individual book? Do you start to rip off the pages of those books or annotate with post-its? Like that is the next step. But I do think it's realistic to imagine taking a photo of a library or shelves of a library and have it virtually and have it accessible. VR or not doesn't matter. It can be done this way, but doesn't have to. So I think it is definitely feasible. But what the next interactions beside quote unquote just reading or consuming the individual books would that allow?
Thank you, Fabian. That is a perfect question. I'm going to build on that question because I can't answer it, but we should all try. Stepping back a little bit to what Mark said about the cover. The shape of things is important. We have talked about abstract shapes in XR, but some of these abstract shapes are with us in the world and they happen to not be abstract, I'm sorry. I mean, books, right? It is important to be able to have that. And inside books, sometimes we look at layouts depending on different things. So then we get to the question that Fabienne was talking about, which is, I would say, not the shape of things, but the shape of knowledge. How do we build them? It's something we started to experiment with, of course, and what Fabienne has built. You put this here, that there, and you see the shape. And how can you give quote unquote color to that? Now, I'm just going to give you a link here to finish my point. And I know it's not popular with everyone, but I have started playing with AI music composition, and I think it's really, really relevant because it's very weird. The link there happens to be the first 15 or so Shakespeare sonnets done in various jazz, easy listening, and hip hop styles. I call it composition because it's a different kind of composition than notes, of course, but it still has to be controlled by a human user to a certain level. So I can say male, female, and all of these things. I can specify in the prompt, and here you do instrumental, all of that. Point of it is, we talk about visuals a lot because that's what we're about, but I've been playing with these today. I spent the entire morning making them. I got a bit obsessive. When I now listen to them later, these sonnets, because the songs are actually, I would say, objectively good in the sense of what they pretend to be. I'm not saying they're art by any means. That's not what I'm saying. But the notion of listening to Shakespeare's sonnet as one of them as a song, you remember the lyrics partly because of the way it was sung, right? Because becomes the packaging of it. It becomes an oral book cover, so to speak. So the fact that this is so easy to do now, I find scary. I don't think it's necessarily a great thing. The only thing that helps me not lose my mind over it is desktop publishing when that happened. The elements of desktop publishing were partly fonts. So anybody with no taste and no knowledge could still produce a document that had perfect fonts. So now anybody with, it's happening with 3D, it's happening with text, it's happening with video, it's happening with images and music. We have a different kind of set of elements to take from, like fonts. So all of that going in circles, going back to the notion of the author, honoring the author. If someone takes the time to write a short article, we should allow them to present it really clearly, because it's very easy to write a long crap article, you know the joke. Very easy to do AI horrible writing. So within the work that we're doing, when someone does write something clear, sweats over it, does it beautifully, we should think about how to make that on a pedestal, so to speak. That was a lot of stuff. Thank you for your patience. And thank you for the link there, Fabienne. That is really, really super ridiculously cool. I'm happy to take comments on that if you have them after Peter.
Okay. Going back to the library notion, if we're in a virtual library, one thing that I could do that you can't do in a physical library would be to clone a book and put a second copy on a different shelf where I think it really belongs by association on some different dimension than the classification system that the library used to linearize everything in its collection. In my own collection, I actually there are a couple books where I've over the years wound up inadvertently repurchasing a copy of a book and putting it in the section that the second copy belonged in, even though the first copy belonged in a completely unrelated section I hadn't been working with for a while in another room in the library. Couple beautiful little anecdotes too. A book in a virtual library, if the library winds up being subject to reorganization, and actually even in a physical library, books should know where they'd been shelved in the past. I had a couple cases when I was at Syracuse. We had a table just inside of the Berkeley Law Library that had all of the newly arrived books. And I remember there was one volume and had a distinct red cover on it, and I'd been looking at it in the fall. Come spring, I wanted to find that book again, only by that point, it had been integrated into the main collection. And I remembered, It was in October that you got it. It was on your new book rack in October, and it was a red cover. Can you help me find the book? I don't remember what the title was. And the librarians were like, "Oh, gee, that's a good question. We don't have any record along those lines. There's no way to query the database on the fact that it was, an oversized red book cover to filter the collection to find where one of those that had been recently acquired would have landed." In
Yeah,
another
Peter,
case,
yeah.
in another case, I was looking for a book that the computer said was on the shelf. And I was at the location on the shelf, and the book wasn't there. The computer insisted it was there. And it turns out that the book had been shelved at the correct location in the Environmental Science and Forestry library on a different quad. And it wasn't in the library that it was supposed to have physically been in. But again, it was in the correct shelf position for the wrong library that it landed in. So these kinds of things where if the artifact had a record of its own history of where it had been when, that could be extremely useful, even like an anonymized system to record. So maybe I could know that you were showing me the book, Frode, when you were borrowing it a couple months ago, so I could tell the system, my friend Frode showed me a book that he had out. Could you help me find that book so that I could borrow it for myself? So we could have these histories. The data's storage is tiny. There's enough storage space to handle all that.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, a lot of that comes down to exactly that, getting the data and making the data available. So they're interesting notions. But if we, for ease of real world aspects, if we look at, we looked at books as units, what about aspects of them, books or papers, right? We talked briefly about having, authors on a shelf, citation links as maps, topics extracted based on our own preferences, publication dates and timelines. What are the things that you guys like dream about? I'll tell you a problem and interrupt me because this is a bit waffly. In the system we have now for author, I can embed other maps, which is really, really cool. You just click on it, boom, it opens, right? So you can have myriads of maps. The design problem is the top level map. It's a bit ugly, right? I want to be able to have different maps for, let's say, Sloan, author, symposium, whatever it might be. But it should be it shouldn't just be rough on a piece of paper. Even on the Mac desktop, we have grids and all of that. In AR or VR with walls, I could put that there, and that there, and it has a certain kind of stickiness or structure or grid, as Keith would say. Do you have notions of, yeah, Jimmy, please.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to interject, but to me, it's about discovery and the ability to have a huge universe of titles in front of you and then do some kind of embodied version of a beam search or a Monte Carlo search for what you're interested in looking for down these forking paths of branches that lead somewhere that is interesting, that you have some kind of ability to control through sort of again in an embodied digitally enhanced way, rather than just leaving it up to some algorithm, but you can steer it a bit and you can have the feedback of doing that as you go through. To me, that's a big part of the capability that this unlocks to help do is sort of provide that, connection between a big noisy corpus or whatever you want to call it, whatever you're looking at, and then being able to nail that down to something that you're actually looking for at a more granular level.
Thank you. I have thoughts, but Ken has better thoughts.
No, I have thoughts that are almost as good as Frode's thoughts.
Oh, let's fight over it. Arm wrestle.
So I'm going to respond to what Jimmy just said. I agree with that. And it occurs to me that when I was a student, I would discover all sorts of things that I'd never even known existed because I had to go to the library to find things. And I learned about all these random topics which I got interested in or found novels or whatever. And it occurs to me that my students, not only may they never have done that, but the entire concept of doing that isn't even in their universe. So this is something that we all have had the experience of when we were students, but I don't know if they've ever actually physically gone to the stacks or why they ever would, given the way that the education is structured now.
That's a really important point. I was a horrible student. I was, well, art student studying advertising. And then at some point I found out there was a library. Oh, that's neat. So I was one of those idiots. And Mark can see the results of that and how we deal with sources sometimes. But how about we, for a moment, start with a normal book in space? Because layout can matter, right? And of course, we all agree that you should be able to change the layout and view it, whatever. But start with a book and add magic, right? So the magic will be how you find it, how you organize it, where you put it, how you extract things from it. Any thoughts on that before we hand over to Mark? The serendipity, I just see what you're writing here, Rob, is obviously a huge part of what this can make happen. Rob, do you have a book that happens to be on your desk in front of you? Can you hold it up, please? Like we're in a magic show. Like, right. Okay. So he's holding up. What is that?
These are two books by friends.
Okay. So you hold up that
I
book.
still have to write reviews.
Cool. So you hold up that book and it stays in place like you're doing it in a headset. Because already with the Vision Pro, reading a PDF, absolutely not a problem in a headset, right? It's a bit of a waste, but not a problem. Then what? What do you guys want to have happen? I'm really going to the basics here just to see what will fall out. Double page spread, thoughtfully laid out by an author or a designer who really knows about information is beautiful. All that's taken care of. What do you want to see behind it, or what do you want to see connected to it, or how do you want to place it?
I think the point of paper is to focus on the paper and rule out everything else around it.
That's a really strong point. Thank you for ruining my argument.
Pleasure.
But
You
that
may
is
not want to just focus. I mean, that's a focused reading. I want to read the linear. I want to follow that author's play. The book is a play, essentially. It's, you know, it's something, a performance that you want to experience in its whole, versus something you want to dissect and do you know, an academic work and write illumination and kind of argue with bits of it, which is different from, you know, reading a novel versus a white paper or an academic journal paper. You go for it.
I was once in the Rare Book Library at Stanford. They had a copy of the 1474 edition of The City of God, and it was a wonderful thing to look at. But what I was interested in was the ways in which those books were illuminated after they were printed. And I could only do that online. I found a beautiful one that I used in a book. So in a headset, that would be awesome. You could just pull it up and put it in place.
perfect.
I could use that.
Yeah, I've seen and some things I'm doing in Federated Wiki, we do Miller columns. You got columns side by side, and you kind of see, well, here's some links from the previous document, link back. In a VR world, you can do like a 3D cascading thing and say, well, here's all the references in these pages or the chapter you're in or whatever, extending out behind it automatically, uncovered as you're reading the linear text. So basically, you can start to follow the footnotes, the illumination parts that we get with hyperlinks today, and more dynamically. So when the footnote, you don't have to get out of the document right away and go, what's this footnote? Go find it and do the hyperlinking that we do with books today. You can have it kind of sit there and pop up in the background and say, well, later on, I'll get to that tab. which is kind of the way the browser works, where you got 50 billion tabs open of things. I'm going to go back to that later because I want the story. I'm following the story, or I'm reading the play of the novel. The linearization of the story is important for us to comprehend everything. So how do you not interrupt that linear flow when you really want to also follow down all these other paths? And it's kind of like an adventure game, a maze of twisty passages, and you can get lost. But that losing it is like the library effect, or what was it called later? There was someone referred to it as the library angel kind of thing. And you have that happen when you're browsing the internet, and all of a sudden you discover someone else who does something good, and oh, this is a wonderful community. Now I found a community, the way I found you guys, and some of the other people I work with now. Anyways, the serendipity of that is where I think VR, XR, VR kind of things can help enable that more than just reading linear text and cogitating and then following the footnotes afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that, Mark, Peter, Ken?
So going back to books, I didn't respond immediately because I was waiting for someone to step in with something that, might work better to your hopes. But I mean, I don't want to read a book in XR. I want to interact with the contents of the book. The book is a compressed form that was an artifact of the constraints of the means of its production. That doesn't make it a bad thing. I love books. I'm surrounded by them. But if I can have the information extracted, I would like to be able to interact with it. The problem is it rapidly becomes the infinite probability vortex, if I've got to the right way. And I am not Zaphod Beeblebrox. So most people we get rapidly overwhelmed. And the other thing is that it's not actually until you start interacting with actual data as opposed to imaginary data that you actually begin to sort of have a better sense of what you might want. So in the imaginary setting, well, the answer is always the thing that you expected. And the reality is it very rarely is. And the sad thing is all too often we give up on actually testing any of these things. So we always stop short of, oh, well, it's going to be too much effort, or let's just imagine it works. And I'm reflecting on some decades of basically rummaging through other people's information, trying to fix stuff for them. I'm a profound sort of supporter of the concept. No, actually go make some of this data, because it's not till you really see it that you get a better understanding of what actually can be produced and just there for us, and actually what is imagined but doesn't really exist. So, I think that's something that we might better explore than, yes, we can make a very sexy looking book in XR, but has it moved? Is it really moving things forward, given that it's a technology we're leaving astern of us? I think that, the challenge is say, well, okay, if I could take all this and put it around, how would I reposition it, rather thinking, so Rob's comment to, well, I'd like to see the contents of the book I'm writing. I'd like to see this volume of all the things around me, and thinking about actually realistically what that looks like, and not just in terms of the visual surface objects, but what lies behind those objects that allows them to be meaningful in the space, however they're actually visually presented. Thanks.
That is indeed the struggle. Peter?
Okay, I'd like to be able to get at more of the context in which the artifact was created. So tell me, what conferences did the author attend right before he wrote this thing? What topics were dominant in the discussion at that point in time? What were happening in terms of world events that might have shaped the formation of the text? So all that background information in our XR, VR environment could be pulled up. You could have a couple AI agents go off, and one could give you maybe, the blue pane to the left will be historical stuff. The green pane will be biographical information. And as I'm going through the book and I highlight an author or a term, all of that contextual background could get surfaced for me automatically by the background agents. So it's sort of like, imagine you had a couple of research assistants who are looking over your shoulder while you're doing the work, and each one specialized in some different areas and having them whisper some ideas or suggestions that come to mind. So it's sort of like a community of minds as opposed to just me interacting with the book itself. Now, since it's imagine a totally virtual environment, if there's a citation, I could have the book in my hands actually morph into the book being cited. And then I could be in the version of that, flip around in it a little bit, close that book up, and it would morph back into the book that I started from at the place I'd left off. So we can sort of have that contextual stack be instrumentalized by the environment and made available to help, instead of just having to carry that all in your head without any affordances to support it.
Exactly what we need to look at, Peter. Thank you. And Ken?
I completely agree with Mark. This is a book. Somebody put a lot of work into making this book the way it is. The printing and the font and the size of the pages and the weight of it. And there's a tremendous amount of design that goes into this physical artifact that the author had a lot to do with. And I do not want to second guess that. But while I'm reading that book, and I'm going to just forget about mixed reality here because I don't actually think it needs to be relevant to this. I'm reading this book. Maybe I'm wearing my glasses. It has a little camera in it. I don't even think about that. But as I'm looking at the book, I'm saying, oh, there's an interesting passage there. And I make some sort of gesture or whatever. And on my computer screen in front of me is whatever I want, if I want some augmentation of that book. And I'm still reading the book. So I don't want to be taken away from my room. I don't want to be taken away from my coffee. I want to just be reading my book. And if I want to use some future stuff, leave me alone and let me do it.
Yeah, definitely. Fabienne?
I will at some point share some empty glasses that I 3D printed that don't have any lenses in order to tinker with this kind of things, because then you don't even need the lens. You just need like the frame around it to look at what you're looking at, let's say. So I do think it's definitely again generative. What I wanted to go a bit deeper in was I think Peter mentioned millions of tabs or billions of tabs, which triggered me. It get me tense just to imagine somebody having this amount of tabs. But what I think is interesting, and it happened today actually, so that's why I have it in mind, is that that's how we read. Like we talk about books, and books are very important, and I playfully shared the link before about the case against book. And there is, yeah, I love book. I also hate book in the sense that we're very much stuck in the past, in my opinion, which is also why this group of passionate people is precious to me. But somehow I think most people, most of us included, but most people do read with tabs or through the browser, let's say. And it does mean that, for example, I mentioned tab grouping in the chat, or how people start to name the group of tabs. So I think the new affordances we have on tabs as a way to read through information, the content that is linked that I think is pretty much not in all cases. So that was quite interesting also before to distinguish, like, is it reading for entertainment, like a traditional sci-fi novel or whatever people are into, versus, let's say, studying a topic, and then it's not at all the same way to read. It is putting words, but still, it's not the same way at all. But I think the reading through tabs and how we have new affordances in tabs, I imagine some people have groups in groups of tabs. I wrote little scripts to manipulate tabs and like dump tab list in a text file so that you can share your group of tabs to others. I think I believe it's a quite interesting things to look at, even though, again, when we compare to the book itself as an object that maybe we would idealize a little bit here, I think there is quite a lot to learn in there, in the mode of reading through tabs and the different ways. And there was a lot of hype, I think, a couple of years ago about one browser that had like vertical list of tabs. And I think that was, okay, I didn't use it much, so I should not be critical of it, and I will not. But the amount of hype it generated just because tabs were presented a different way, in my opinion, shows that there is something there that most people, a lot of people that are going to that hype, it is very important to a lot of people. It is, again, the way that we tend to read and manipulate information nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, that goes down to the medium we as a community would like to focus ourselves around, if it's document-based or web-based. I have problems with a lot of reading on the web because of link rot, amongst other things. And then you have the weird slow connections and they don't go to source. But of course, there's a lot of valuable reading, totally. But on this notion as well, it's beginning to seem clearer to me that combinations of reading, if we now assume that you're reading for pleasure, but professional pleasure, you're reading something within your field or something you actually want to remember. Reading fiction is probably going to be best with a paperback forever. It's just lovely, right? So when you do that, obviously I fail miserably, but for instance, when I write articles for the book, I try to get all the meaning onto the first 2-page spread. It's a really interesting metric for me because human eye scale, a 2-page spread of normal type, it's good. You don't move your eyes too much. You don't need to move your head. So if we allow people to continue to present well, as Jim talks about, nicely, even just everyday person laid out, not graphic designer, nice tabs, paragraphs and all of that stuff. And we augment that with how that is connected in space, I think we get somewhere. And of course, you should absolutely be allowed to read scrolling or paginated. That should be entirely up to you, no question. But whatever it is, if you are focusing on a bit of text that's important to you, it should obviously be pleasant. I'm reading a wonderful book that I've told you guys a few times. It's called Peak Human. It's a history of human civilizations, highly recommended. I'm reading it for pleasure, but there's quite a few times I wish I could take a thing in the book, like a paragraph, and either look it up, timeline it, or put it to the side. Right? So the spatiality doesn't have to compete with the layout. The layout is when you're calmly looking at something, but you don't want to do that all the time. You need to be able to change in and out of that, and that's an interesting challenge. In the same way that it is really useful to have a visual library. That doesn't mean you should always look at that. Mark, please.
I was just picking out one of these off the shelf. I'm always surprised that actually Tuft, is it Tufty or Tuft? I'm whichever. Anyway,
it's always the other one, Mark.
Well,
in my experience,
his books get name checked a lot, and they do in this sense. This is the thing we talk about. This is a juxtaposition. Here are your endnotes, footnotes, actually next to the thing they talk about. But you don't see it much done there. I mean, it's obviously a regular thing for a board enabled coder to make. Oh, I'll make a Tufty style layout in thing that I use. So you see it name checked a lot. You actually see, funnily enough, you see remarkably little use of it, which is interesting. But certainly in a digital form, in this sort of disembodied thing, I think it goes back to what Ken was saying. So now I'm reading the stuff, but I want to see the things around it. And the things around it, or they could be sort of stored for you, but it's following out the context. Interesting, one thing that I think someone's already said it, the book gives you focus. You don't tend to go off. It's not like reading Wikipedia and you went to look at, I don't know, the GDP of Rwanda and you're now reading all about whales and Antarctica and who knows how you got there. But whereas a book, that's sort of less easy. And you might, occasionally I go through my bookcase and I take an enormous stack of bookmarks out, so they can be used for the next project, because I sort of find as I go, I tend to drop in bookmarks that I know I should be making as digital notes so that I can somehow come back to them. But actually, if I make them digital notes, I probably never will revisit them. Whereas I'll pick out the books, well, I know, gosh, and then I'll find that bookmark, and then then that will fly back. So there's an interesting sort of spatial thing there. And I'm also reminded, I put in the sidebar, someone was talking about some, books in different forms, and I was surprised how difficult it was to take well, I took this, which is my 90 edition, I think, of Literary Machines, and turned it into an EPUB, which, suffice to say, enraged Ted, so I don't share it because it's his copyright. But I was just interested, and surprisingly, it turns out to be rather difficult to do. Sorry, my camera's doing some. It's decided it wants to focus where I am not. Yeah, so that's interesting too, in terms of, well, how better if we want to consume content in a sort of digital setting, whether virtualized, mixed reality, whatever. But if we want to basically escape, I'll put it, if we want to escape off the paper page, how better might we present this, especially when you've got complex work? If it's a novel, I'm quite happy to just scroll it past on a reader because I'm not really reading it for the beauty of the print on the page.
Yeah.
If I'm reading something like this, I really do enjoy all the thought, and rather, it's already been said, the thought that went into the design of this that helps me to take meaning from it is actually quite important. But I'm sure we can do more than just making a better page if we actually think about it in the context of the linkage we want to make out from it. Thanks.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with that those issues. Because the Tufte books are beautiful, and when you read a page, it's really clear. However, in my mind, they're horribly laid out in terms of information navigation. All the pages are beautiful, but I can't see why is that there and why is this here. So what I really am imagining for what we're working on is that you can do a Tufte style things outside of the page in XR. So when you're reading that, you can put this that little, manually, as the author, you have your 2-page spread or whatever you choose as the unit of the main text. You put a thing there, you put a thing there, you put an image there, you build that space. Just like you would do it in 2D, you build it spatially, maybe using 3D, doesn't really matter. But then there's the magic of the structure. You always have accessible hierarchies of what the book is, how it relates to other things, citations. I think those two things coming together is very, very powerful. To do the structure, we need the metadata, obviously. And to do the beautiful layout, we need practice.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I'm Dini's not here, but Dini's asked me to do a lecture to her course on internet and stuff next term. No pressure. I'm following Vint, I find, which put me slightly on the back foot. So I to make myself as a sort of dog feeding exercise, I said, right, I'm just so over PowerPoint. I'll do this as a tapestry, but I'm sitting spinning my wheels because I have all this freedom and I don't know where to start, which is interesting. But part of the reason, in the sense of saying I'll do it, and therefore I feel obliged to deliver on it, is to actually explore this thing. Because in a sense, if I'm allowed this freedom to have a multiple narrative, it's quite interesting. Part of the reason for doing is I want an artifact that is of more use to the students. I mean, I could stand there and just talk. I wouldn't be very exciting, but I could cover most of the topic. But I thought, actually, people say, oh, and you can download the PowerPoint. You look at the slides and think, and then you try and remember the talk. Whereas actually giving something that actually has that second level of content for the students, and all the references and all that stuff there linked in and ready to go, seems interesting. It's not that I'm trying to sort of venerate tapestry above other things. It's something here, it's open source and we can use it. And so one of the things I think I ought to have a go at is to just see how much harder it is actually to use than the tools we have at the moment.
It's such an important aspect because what I mentioned earlier about me personally having a problem in Author, having a top level map because it's ugly. It's just, where do I put it on that thing? Having shelves, bookshelves is really, really important. So you don't go into your room wondering where to put the darn book. You put it in the bookshelf. You don't put it on the table unless you want to read it. To have something to help you scaffold your knowledge is really, really important, provided it's flexible. Absolutely. Tapestry is absolutely wonderful, but it breaks the kind of 2-page initial spread in a good way, but it gives you that extra level of, okay, how do I orient myself?
So I'll vent a bit, as Mark, I think, did. One of the first job I had to do, or mission, let's say, at the European Parliament, at the Innovation Lab, was to transform computational notebooks, so some ways to play with data, to a PDF. And I was like, or I don't remember if it was PowerPoint or PDF, but then I spent like days or weeks, I don't remember, arguing that it was not possible. Of course, it's technically possible, but it's losing the entire point. So I think it's really challenging when we are like artifacts we have to produce, and it's not like, oh, it's the beautiful constraint of the page and the frame, and that gives us, like, the constraint gives you the creativity you need. Yes, but if the process that you get from the tool is what you're trying to demonstrate, you cannot put it, let's say, with the artifact. It is losing its own, the very meaning of the things you're trying to show. So I think it's quite entertaining and funny when Ken put the glasses on, even though they exist, but they were not the right glasses, because it prompts you to do this. Like, if you were into the thing, not like a little bit of role play, that you have to genuinely give the chance to the idea or the tool, and whenever you don't really do it, and then you just rely on the remaining artifacts because that's the format, let's say, you're used to, being PowerPoint or PDF or whatever, or even Tapestry, let's say, then you have to be really cautious about what you're going to demonstrate, because the kind of flattening or whatever you want to call it, it is not just frustrating. It is like it's totally missing the point. It's really it's not just frustrating. It has to be either experienced, or like the translation itself means that you gave up on the very idea you're trying to explore. So I think that's where the deep frustrations come from. It's not taking the idea seriously. So to look back to something a bit more positive, let's say, is that it means, yeah, we can do this. We can take ideas seriously by enacting or doing the thing, or being into the motion. So I think maybe finding protocols to attempt at doing it, putting the headset on or whatever we want to do, but then it's not that hard if we do it.
Mark.
I have a quick question for Ken, really, because I know you said, you when you're sort of interacting with your students, you're trying to put all the information sort of in front of them. And I was having this parallel thought that, okay, well, if you were doing, in a sense, something like a tapestry, in other words, but you just weren't doing it on a single 2D plane, as I'm doing on a web page. And whether that even makes it even more complex. In other words, if you're saying, well, we're going to talk about all this, I'm going to put these objects out there. How do you sort of approach that, if you do that at all?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Yeah, sorry. Because I recall you saying, in the past, that when you're sort of working with your students, one of the things you try and do is you try and basically put the things you're talking about in the space between yourselves. Mm-hmm. So I was just drawing a sort of I was bending the thing even further and said, well, going from PowerPoint to Tableau, and then taking Tableau off the 2D screen and sticking it into the sort of your sort of environment. And I'm beginning to wonder how that looks, if it looks at all, or whether you have a thought on that.
My environment is much more focused. I generally only have 4 things on that screen. One is me. They see my video, and this is true whether I'm teaching in person or I'm teaching over Zoom, is they see the same thing. So there's me, full screen. And then I have a set of interactive diagrams or slides to go through what the topics are. And sometimes they're pictures, sometimes they're text, sometimes they're little bits of program that I can say, oh, this is how inverse kinematics works. Here, we're playing with it, And then I also have the ability to bring up, because I'm teaching 3D computer graphics, to bring up little 3D models that float in front of me with with clear backgrounds. So it's just 3D, like it's a cube or it's a whatever, it's a torus. It's an engine. And then if I want to, I can bring up editable code. And we can edit that code or we can change values in that code and it changes things in the 3D model. So basically that entire screen is about teaching computer graphics. Every once in a while, I will jump, I have the ability to say, oh, let's just fill the screen with some web page because I want you to look at this reference. But I actually don't do that too often. Or I want to just jump to a video and show you somebody's computer graphic animation. So then we're going completely into we're just looking at something space. But when I'm actually teaching a subject matter, I'm generally either showing them diagrams or interacting with them, or I'm coding or I'm interacting with a 3D model because it's just about that topic and I don't want anybody to be distracted. And there is definitely always, because this is the 21st century and everybody has evil phones. There's absolutely a very important aspect to this is a magic show. And if you miss something, you will lose out. So you have to kind of keep things a little bit like, whoa, then that happened. And it turns out that works out really well. There's another benefit in that this coming Wednesday, my students are going to be giving their final projects. They did preview projects last Wednesday, and they've definitely adopted this style of I have to put on a show and I have to grab your attention and you have to like really love what I'm showing you. So, and it's not all over the place. Our class isn't about let's look up lots and lots of references. I mean, they can look up references, but it's about we're learning about rendering, we're learning about modeling, we're learning about texture. This is very focused. We're coding here. So that I'm not saying that would work for all topics, but that's the software I've built for teaching my topic because I think that's the appropriate software for this topic.
No, thank you. That's really interesting because it does occur to me that actually it's a nice way into maybe the tapestry is you start in a sense with the sizzle. And then for them for the later read, the stuff that otherwise you'd put on a sort of on a PowerPoint slide, all that text and stuff that they're not going to read, or worse, you're going to read for them while they read it at the same time. They can come back to later because they may want that because they want that for their study. But in the sense of so the point of this thing, so the idea, so that's going to put me on back foot. So I've now got to find my complete lack of visual design skills and come up with things. But no, that's actually really interesting. So that's actually helped me a lot. So thank you.
So let me just look at our schedule here. We have on the 22nd open office and 29th some kind of a year in review. I don't expect that will be, let me just get you guys back, a major pre-done presentation or anything, but it might be a useful session for those who want to come in. Oh yeah, of course you have, yeah, I'm seeing your message, Ken, back to Peter. But any final comments for today or questions or? So next year we won't be Sloaned and we will be more tool-based. We will be based around not why or what, but how. And try to invite more developers in so we can build stuff and then critique stuff and then say we should build something different, but we should try to build stuff, realize it's horrible, build it again, rather than talk at length as to going in circles. Any final words for today? I am guessing no. Oh, yeah, Ken, Peter, good. All right, see you soon. If you want to come the next few, that's lovely. If not, see you next year, but see you when you're here. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Have a great week.